Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and today I'm talking about what it means to review a game. This video is prompted by recently reviewing Elder Scrolls. Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era from Chip Theory Games. I put 25-ish hours into the game, something like that. I don't know exactly, over the course of the prototype, past plays, and then the pre-production copy I finally have. And I titled it Review. I started my video with, clarifying my experience with the game, even clarifying the fact that there's so much in this game to cover, that there's so much more to get to. But I spent enough time in this that I feel comfortable calling it a review. And I had a comment on the video. Just one comment, mind you. This video is not... Whenever I choose to reply to a single comment in a full video, usually the point is not about that one person, because I don't need a full video to reply to a single individual. Rather, it's if I think that the thing they said is worth engaging in because I think it's a worthwhile topic. That's usually when I'll get into it, and I do think this is a worthwhile topic, to the point that I've actually done several videos already in this, in this role, in this YouTube role, whatever you want to call it. I've done several videos already about what it means to review a game, how to cover games, the difference between someone playing a game for fun, the difference between a full-time reviewer. This is a topic that is dear to my heart because of the complexities of all of it. And their comment was basically saying, how can you call this a review? You haven't finished and played through everything in this game. In the video game space, they play through the entire game before they call it a review, and you've played through an arc of the game. It doesn't matter if it's 25 hours, you've played through an arc of the game, you haven't experienced everything, how can you call it a review? It's a fair question. It's a genuinely fair question. I'm not... If it was a bad question, I wouldn't engage with it. I tend to engage most often with these types of things when I think there's a good thought behind it, and it is a good thought, and it is a good topic. And so this entire video is about what it means to review things, and what does it take to review. What does a review literally mean? We might cover that. I might pull up my phone at some point and read a little definition of a review. I don't know. We'll see. But most importantly, it's about my own take, my own 2 cents, my own opinion around reviewing things and what that label means, and also communication and transparency, because I think that's far, far more important than anything else. A long time ago, in a very different universe, but on a different couch, way back when I was first doing videos, I did a video. I'll try to link to it down below if I can find it. I tried to do a video once on, can you review a game you've only played one time? The short answer is yes. That's the short answer. You can review a game you've only played one time, in my opinion, although, again, I think communication, consistent language, all those things are the most important things. I have my own 2 cents. I'll talk as well about my own policy as far as what I do on the channel as far as reviewing things, but I do believe you can review a game you've only played once. This is the part, I'm going to pull up my phone. I'm going to go ahead and read off what a review means, because little definition of a review right now, because I think it's relevant to this video. Review definition. Okay. According to the Oxford Dictionary, a formal assessment or examination of something with the possibility or intention of instituting change if necessary. A critical appraisal of a book, play, movie, exhibition, etc., published in a newspaper or magazine. To examine or assess something formally with the possibility... Oh, that's just the verb. That's the verb. Honestly, the first definitions are the really definitions. 3, definition. A ceremonial display and formal inspection of military or naval forces. That doesn't seem relevant at all. None of these things give qualifications that we might put into the board game space. None of these, or any space for that matter, none of those definitions give any qualifications around what level of experience you have to have with something in order to review that thing. I think the literal definition of a review would cover anything in any way, shape, or form that is critically assessing that thing. Now, there is implied experience. That is part of what we have to deal with. What's the implied experience when someone reviews that thing? But way back when, the short summary of my entire video, way back when, of the can you review a game you've only played once, is yes, you can. If you've experienced the thing and you want to give your opinion of that thing, you can give your opinion of that thing. There is not a level of experience you need to have with the thing to critically assess the thing. Now, is it true that you can have more experience with the thing and better critically assess a thing? 100% it's true. But that's true on your 3rd play, on your 7th play, and on your 19th play, and on your 117th play. There's always going to be more experience you can gain with something in order to better critically evaluate that thing. That is always going to be true. But it's not essential. It's just more experience with that thing. It does make you better equipped to deal with that thing, but it's not essential in any way. I did get into a lot more in that video. It wasn't just, the 30 seconds I just covered. A part of it I covered is the nature of the hobbyist space that we're in, the fact that you can't expect people to spend X amount of time with something when there is barely enough money in this space, and we will touch upon that in this video as well. I talked and covered the fact about the nature of people often want negative or critical reviews, meaning, well, critical is complicated, but people want negative reviews. People want reviews that focus on the things they didn't like and how bad the experience was, but they also want people to play that game 6 times before they do so, which again is just an unrealistic assessment for anyone in this hobbyist space to continuously spend time playing something you don't enjoy so that I can tell you on camera how much I didn't enjoy it and how well equipped I am to tell you how much I didn't enjoy it. Those are other things we get into as far as why I believe reviewing something you've only played once is a reasonable thing to do. On my own channel, let's give my own qualifications. Before we dive too far into this video, I forget. I've said this many times before, but I'll say it again. My own channel policies personally are, if I've played it one time, I call it a first impressions. To me, that is a choice I make, and I'll explain why I make that choice. It is not something I feel is essential. I feel you can play something one time and call it a review. But I personally choose to call it a first impressions if I played it once, versus if I usually, and from there I don't really give hard rules. The softer rules I give are usually if I don't like a game, you can probably assume that I've played it twice. Very rarely am I going to continue to dive into something I didn't enjoy. The second play is to affirm that it wasn't something unique about the first play, and at that point I'm comfortable saying I didn't like it for reasons X, Y, and Z. And then as far as the games that I do enjoy, you can generally assume I've played them anywhere between 2 and 10 times. Usually more likely 3 to 10 times, whatever it is, because I liked it. It's easier to play it again. But again, there aren't really hard rules around that. The only hard rule I give is if it's one play, I call it a first impressions, and if it's more than that, I'm comfortable calling it a review. And I understand and appreciate that some people won't be happy with enough experience. Did you play it at every single player count? Did you play it in every single possible form? Did you play it with all the things? Did you go through all of the content? This is particularly relevant to the initial impetus for this video for Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era or any giant campaign game. Have you experienced all of the content of that game? Because if you haven't, how can you call it a review? And my answer is always the same. You can give a critical opinion of something without having experienced every single facet of that thing. Your opinion will be lacking compared to someone who did experience every facet of that thing. And this is true for video games as well. There's a different standard in the video game space. We'll get to that as well, but this is true of video games. If you play 10 hours of Elder Scrolls versus if you finish Elder Scrolls, well, not Elder Scrolls, I meant to say Elden Ring. If you play 10 hours, I mean, it doesn't matter honestly. If you played 10 hours of Elden Ring versus if you finish Elden Ring, you can call it a review and give your opinions on that thing. The person who played 10 hours will have less experience and therefore be a less informative review than the person who finished it. But you can still review the thing. You do not have to continuously go through the thing again and again and again in order to be able to critically review that thing. My personal gauge is I like to experience different facets of a thing. My own bar for myself is a combination of what I think is a realistic thing to do and what I personally feel is a standard worth holding myself to. And it's a weird combination. It's always going to be, for my own channel, for myself, it's always going to be about what I personally feel. And again, it's a combination of those two things. What is realistic and achievable? And then what lines do I not want to cross? And what I mean by that, let's go to the number of plays, for example. For me personally, I guesstimate that 80% of the time, my opinion after one play is going to be is going to be the same as my opinion after multiple plays. Meaning 80% of the time, that first impression that I got after that first play is going to hold true across multiple plays as well. Most of the time, my opinion does not change. Because I play a lot of games. I know what I like. I know what I don't like. And it's not hard to dive into a game and be like, I really like these things. And I can also use all the information of all the plays I've had and all the board games I've played to extrapolate whether my opinion will stay the same after multiple plays, whether it won't, and sometimes whether there's an uncertainty. Like, I know I enjoyed my first play. I'm not sure if it'll hold up for multiple plays. Or I know I enjoyed my first play, but I think it's going to go down after multiple plays. Or I know I enjoyed my first play, but I think it'll stay the same after multiple plays. I can have that thought after the first play, and then from there, multiple plays establishes whether that initial thought is true or not. Whether that initial assumption, based on what I've experienced, is true. And let's use a baseline example. If I play a game that has a medium level of decision making, nothing overly complicated, it's a midweight game. A good example might be Citizens of the Spark, okay? It's a good example. Citizens of the Spark is a recent game by Thunderworks Games that I played, and the decision space in that game is decent. It's not amazing, it's not incredible, it's a decent decision space in the game. But the thing about that game that makes me realize it is likely to hold true for multiple plays, and it has, I've since played it multiple times, but I'm saying for my first play assumptions and impressions, was the market of cards you have in the game is always variable. And so for me, knowing that, I know that even though the decision space is a little lighter than what I personally want, and it doesn't have the fun factor, sometimes games have a fun factor that holds you true. Like games like Codename, So Clover, or So Many Things and Rings. Sometimes there's games that have a fun factor that pulls you in. Citizens of the Spark does not have a fun factor. That's a game I'm playing for the strategic enjoyment of trying to map out a win, a pathway towards victory. But the thing that makes it more likely that I will continue to have that same level of enjoyment play after play is the market of cards is constantly changing, and therefore the concept of the game is the same, but the actual decisions you're making are tweaked every single time you play. And every person is going to have a different opinion, but I know from my experience in the gaming world and the literally thousands of games I've played, I know that that means my opinion of the game for the first play will likely hold consistent-ish across multiple plays. And sure enough, it has. That's me just using information that I've gathered over the years to be able to kind of extrapolate how a first play will go, or a second play, or a third play. Now, I'm not always right. If I was always right, I'd be perfectly comfortable calling something a review after one play. But I'm not always right. I'm right 80% of the time. And being wrong 20% of the time is a big number for me to go on my channel, review the number of games I do, and then be comfortable saying, oh, 20% of those reviews are wrong. That's a big number. And wrong is a relative term. Reviews are always someone's opinion, but if 20% of my listed opinions on video don't actually reflect my opinions after playing the game a second time, that's not good. That's not a good thing. And so my own personal standard is I will be very clear and call it a first impressions when I play it once, and after that I'm comfortable saying it's a review because almost always the second play, this is where we get to that 97%, whatever it is, because while 80% of the time my first opinion holds true, I'd say that 97% of the time my second opinion is true, meaning my second play locks in that opinion. Now there are exceptions. The most common exception here is going to be things like campaign games or evolving games, games that inherently are meant to drastically change the content as you go through it. That is a totally different ballpark. My personal level of how comfortable I feel reviewing a campaign game often takes much more plays. And every game is different, but usually I have to keep playing until I feel I'm not seeing new things. And then my opinion can get locked in at the place where that's happening. And some games that's going to be 6 games, sometimes that's going to be 10 games. Every campaign game is going to be different in that sense. But the basic line for me, and my own standard, is I want to know that my opinions actually have weight to myself. And so I call it that after a certain number of plays. The other thing is going to be the reasonableness about the expectations around content creation, both on yourself from yourself, as well as on others on you. A consistent trend within this space is that many people start joining this content creation sphere out of a passion for the hobby. That's generally how it works because, frankly, there's not a ton of money in it. The most successful content creators are making decent money. The most successful in their field. In most of the fields, if you are the best in your field, you are making a lot of money. And if you're doing really good in your field, you're making a lot of money. In content creation, specifically board game content creation, the best of the best of the best are able to have a pretty decent job. That's the top echelon, and most people don't make it that far, which means most people are creating content out of passion for board games. And that means you have to know what's reasonable, as again, from an expectation on yourself to yourself, as well as the audience's expectations on you. Because people often do want, I touched upon this earlier in the video, but people often do want, you should play that game 6 times that you didn't like so you can not just tell me how you didn't like it, but also be well informed about how much you didn't like it. But that's not something most people do out of passion. That's not something most people are going to do because they love board games. Hey, I love board games. You know a quick way to not love board games? Play a game that you didn't like a whole bunch of times, and then also tell us, how much you didn't like it, and also tell other people are going to tell you how you're wrong about why you didn't like it, even after all those times you played it. That's not a great way to be passionate about the hobby. There's often complaints around how most reviews trend towards the positive, and that's because most people making reviews are doing so because they like board games. Most people are trying to tell you about the thing that they like. They're trying to share what they like. They're not trying to share what they don't like quite as much. There are exceptions. There are many content creators who do a good job of showing things they don't like in different ways, but asking people to really spend time with something, to engage something they don't like, just so you can best call it a review, is always a tricky conversation just from what the industry is. This kind of touches back to the differences between video games and board games, where in the video game space, the amount of money, the amount of views, the amount of everything in the video game space is so much larger, so much magnified, that you can have entire networks devoted to covering board games, devoted to covering video games. Entire networks with tons of people, tons of reviewers, who your job is to play Elden Ring for the next 2 weeks straight and do nothing else, and you're getting paid for that aspect. You're getting paid to do that. The board game space doesn't have that. The closest thing we have to a network of any kind is the Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is easily the only real network we have in the space. We have other companies that are other content creators that consist of multiple individuals, but the only thing really approaching an IGN or not GameStop, Games, whatever the other site is, Games, I've been so a lot of video games, I don't remember all these things, but you know what I'm talking about. The video game industry, the only thing we have close enough or similar enough is the Dice Tower. And everything else is just struggling to, and again, they're not nearly as large as anything in the video game space. It's just a different scope and a different scale, and so the expectations have to be different just because of the practical reality of, as much as it might not hit the standard that we want, and it doesn't hit the standard we want. Again, the only reason I'm engaging with this comment in the first place is because the desire to have someone fully play through every single thing in every single way before offering an opinion, that desire is not unreasonable. It's just unreasonable within the context of what this space is, but it's a reasonable question on its own 2 feet. You watch somebody, going ahead and giving a review of a game, you're like, you didn't like that game, you played it twice, and you give me your opinion of it now? Why didn't you play it 7 times? Did you play it with all the player counts? Did you play it with different groups? How did you not properly, fully expose yourself to this? And that's true when you like it or when you don't like it. In many cases, it's because people want more games played that they didn't like. But it's also just as true when you have something like Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era. This giant game that would take me hundreds of hours to fully immerse myself into. And so your options as the viewer, whoever you are, and again, I recognize most people watching this know this stuff already, but there are always those who don't really think through the practical reality of what they're asking. Your options as a viewer are to basically either have the content much, much later. Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era is a game that the pledge manager, or whatever it is, was closing September 6th. I wanted to get coverage up beforehand, so I spent a reasonable enough 25-ish hours with the game to be able to give you what I felt were comprehensive thoughts on my experience. But I can't possibly give you that, just given my life, given my schedule, given that, if you want a fully fledged everything. And again, some people might say, well, just don't call it a review. I felt I spent enough time with it that I called it a review, but then still made sure to qualify my experience to make sure that you know that even for myself, I felt I had to say I didn't play everything, I didn't experience everything, because I wanted you to know that I had limited experience, even if it was a lot of experience. There is a practical reality to anyone being able to cover anything in any way with whatever degree of time. Nobody has infinite time, nobody has infinite resources, nobody has infinite anything, and so we're all trying to just make the best with what we have. If somebody wants me to spend more time with one game, it means I have to spend less time somewhere else, and that could either be my personal life just falls further into whatever degree of balance I can possibly find, or it means I play less of other games and can give you less thoughts on other games. There's always a trade-off in different ways. And that's why the hobby does have different types of creators. The hobby does have channels like myself, like the Dice Tower, who will try to play as many different games as possible to give you thoughts on as many different games as possible. But then you also have channels like Shut Up and Sit Down, or No Pun Included, who'll do deep dives into singular games. They aren't covering most games. Most games that come out every year are not covered by these channels, but they instead do deep dives into singular games, for better or for worse, to be able to really give you an informed opinion around a single title. And if you only had one or the other, as far as the industry in general, if you only had one or the other as far as content creators, obviously I'm trying to name larger channels, but this is just as true with smaller creators. You'll have smaller creators who spend a lot of time with a singular game, and you'll have smaller creators who play a bunch of different games. But if you only had one or the other, you would not be able to get a good level of something in the industry. You would either be missing deep dives into games, or you'd be missing coverage on as many games as possible. And with 6,000 plus games coming out every single year, it's good to have coverage on a lot of those games. It's good to see some of those be able to rise to the top in different ways. And then very often the deep dives are done on those that are the most popular based on how things have risen to the top. And so the space in general is just trying to juggle. It's all it's trying to do. It's just trying to juggle and be sustainable and everything to line up. The people who are making the content are trying to find the reasons to make the content, whether passion or whatever degree of monetary something they can get out of it. Almost always passion first. This is not a space you get into because you want to make money. This is a space you get into because you're passionate, and then over time, the reason you keep at it is because there is some money involved. I think there has to be money involved in anything like this, because otherwise you can't. It's very hard to keep going when you have a hard day, when you have other responsibilities, when you have that game you don't like, when you have too many things on your plate. It's very hard to keep going if this is only ever passion driven. Having some degree of paycheck, whether it's YouTube ad revenue, whether it's an actual job that's involved here, having some financial incentive does encourage creators to keep going. Whether it's audience supported or however it's supported, it encourages creators to keep going. There needs to be a monetary incentive in the mix if you want your content creators to actually be delivering regular content, as opposed to that one channel that starts up, does content for a year and a half, and then goes away, constantly repeated by another person who's just another hobbyist. And again, I think those hobbyists are good. There's another video I did, I'd have to find it, I don't remember the title of the video, but it kind of touched upon the nature of those who film content as part of a general ongoing responsibility, whether it's a full-time job or not. But anyone who just constantly is trying to put out content on board games is a very different individual in the way they experience and engage with games than those who are just buying their own game and they're like, I want to give my thoughts on this game. And they put out a video once every 2 weeks just because, and no reason, no pressure. They're not trying to play the algorithm. They're not trying to have their videos be super controversial one way or the other. Because again, there's so many different things. If you, in a perfect algorithm-driven world, every game needs to be the best or the worst ever to drive those clicks, to drive those views, to drive those engagement. But people who don't have to play the algorithm, and I will play the algorithm as much as I can, while also trying to recognize that at the end of the day, most games are just good. They're not particularly good, they're not particularly bad. Most reviews I give on this channel are a 3.5 out of 5. It was a good game, I had a good time, it's kind of forgettable, but also fun. Both things can be true at the same time. But if you really want to play the algorithm, something has to be better or worse at any given time. This has to be my best game of the year, my favorite worker placement game. This is a game I wasted my time on. Was this game worth it? You got to play that algorithm to a degree. And again, I'll dabble into it a little bit on my channel when I think it's appropriate. When I do have my favorite game of the year, I will title it appropriately. When I do have a game that wasn't worth the wait, I will title it appropriately. But I have to do so infrequently. People who are not in any way attached to this as a ongoing thing will provide more of that hobbyist side as opposed to that content creator side. And again, it takes all kinds. It takes people who are doing the hobby, it takes people who are doing it as content, as a more of a job, whether there's a paycheck attached or not. It takes people doing deep dives, it takes people doing all the games. At the end of the day, there is a ton of information out there around every single game you want to buy. And at the end of the day, almost all content done around board games is likely not being held to the same standard of review content that there might be in other industries. There's also the plus side that there's always been controversies around the video game industry and how much money is changing hands, and that is likely to happen more in a space like the video game space where there's so much more money at stake at any given point. There's that recent video game that just came out that they're like estimating like lost $100 million and whatnot because nobody's playing it and they put tons of money into it. We don't have that scale or those that weight in the board game industry, which is nice. There's less opportunity for that level of corruption because it's just not as much money at play. And so there are pros to being smaller, there are cons to being smaller. At the end of the day, though, we're all here ideally not because it's smaller or larger, but because we like playing tabletop games. It's my goal to always give you the best content I can. It's my goal to spend as much time with the content, as much time with the games, that I feel that the opinion I'm giving on the other side is a fair opinion, that does not reflect a singular session of highs or lows, or if it is, at least I give you that information. Because the main thing, the main takeaway from all of this is always going to be, for me, consistent language, consistent communication, and transparency. The initial comment for this was about why I titled Elder Scrolls a review. And honestly, in that particular setting, I don't care at all about it. Because I made sure to, in that video, I made sure to give the viewer the information they might want as to how much work went into that. And to anyone who says that, well, what if they don't watch that part? What if they just skip to the end? If you can't be bothered to watch a full video, I don't think you can possibly criticize me for how much time I put into it. If your concern is, well, you shouldn't have titled a review because I only skipped to final thoughts and I wouldn't have even seen the disclaimer, at that point, I just don't care. There's only so much you can expect somebody to give you to stop you having to put in any effort whatsoever. But I think consistent communication and clear expectations is a big deal. I think if you are playing a game once and you want to call it a review, honestly, I don't even care. But I think it's helpful to give that knowledge. It's helpful to give that knowledge to the viewer so they know this is based on a single session. A single session is going to be different sometimes, than a second session. I think giving the viewer the knowledge they need as far as being able to be informed how useful this coverage is. Did you finish that campaign game or not before you covered it? I usually try to say that when I cover a campaign game, like how many sessions I got into it, or roughly how many sessions I got. I'll be like, oh, I didn't finish it, but I got, whatever. I'll try to give you that information because I think it's relevant. What if there's a final twist at the end of it? I try to get that information so the viewer at least knows, is this a full campaign they play? Did you play through the entire Gloomhaven? Or did you play through 20 scenarios? 20 scenarios is a pretty good amount of time to be able to review Gloomhaven. But it's still worth knowing for the viewer that you didn't finish Gloomhaven. I think clear communication and expectations is far more important than the simple label of whether something is or isn't a review. But can you review something you've only played once? In my opinion, yes. Can you review a game you haven't finished? In my opinion, yes. Where it gets technical is, can you review a game you haven't played at all? I guess it depends on what you're reviewing. You might be reviewing your perception of the game, but you can't be reviewing your experience because you didn't have an experience to review. But as long as you've had experience, as long as you're giving context to the experience you had, qualifiers can be helpful. But especially if you're consuming free content, especially if you're just someone watching a bunch of videos from someone else who's making those videos, and you're not paying for those videos, there's only so much expectation you can really have. You can decide not to watch those videos, for sure. But there's only so much reasonable expectation you can have in somebody else's time of how much they have to give so that you feel better about whether that was enough information for you or not. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.